Welcome to Lawyers Coach. My name is Claire Rayson, and each episode will feature myself or Oliver Hansard, both of us coaches and former lawyers, trying to find out what makes lawyers tick. We'll be hearing from various guests and experts, and then at the end of each episode, we will both be reflecting on what they said. Geraldine Atlee is Head of Legal and Business Affairs at BBC Films. In this interview with Oliver, she talks about her journey to the BBC, why she had too much personality to stay in private practice, why she was one of the first in her industry to seek work-life balance, and, to kick off with, why she became a lawyer.
I had a father who was very entrepreneurial, which was inspiring but also slightly scary. There were too many occasions when he came home announcing that he'd remortgaged the house or whatever. So I think more than anything, I just wanted security. I knew that I wanted a profession. I wanted something dependable and reliable, and a qualification that would enable me just to do a regular job. I didn't want to run my own business in the way that he'd done. I also knew that I wanted a family. I think literally from the age of puberty, I knew I wanted kids. So I figured that having a profession would allow me that sort of flexibility. And ultimately, any sort of test that I ever took, these sort of psychometric tests, every time I went into one hoping that it would tell me I'd be a great florist or ballet dancer, it always come back saying, "Oh, you'd be a really good lawyer." So I just think
I'm sure you'd be an
instinctively,
excellent florist as well.
I'm sure maybe there's a niche there, a sort of floral, sort of ballet dancing, lawyering type career that I should have pursued. Anyway, I'm instinctively organised, conscientious. I have a strong sense of fair play and justice. So I think my sort of basic qualities meant that I was kind of suited to the role.
And did you do a law degree, or did you convert?
I didn't. I always knew that doing a sort of conversion course afterwards was an option. So I actually did a geography degree, strangely.
Wow.
Just because I enjoyed it. It was my favourite subject at school, so I did that. But I knew all along that I wanted to go on. I just figured that I'd rather have 3 years of messing about at university followed by a bit of hard study than 3 years studying law. So did a degree, did the CPE conversion course at the College of Law, and then finals as they were then, and then had my training contract, or articles as they were then, with a small media firm in the West End in London.
And how long did you stay there before you decided to go in-house?
Not long. I qualified in 93, which was during a recession. So there wasn't really any media work. I had a long time in their media department. I had 2 seats in their media department, loved it. But when I qualified, there wasn't really any media work. And not long after qualifying, I was made redundant from the property department. So I then made a conscious choice to hold out to get a position back in media law. And I also consciously sought out roles in the house, partly because I'd really enjoyed the sort of the business aspect more. I wanted to be closer to the coalface of the business. Also, I was told by one of the partners in my last appraisal there that I probably had too much personality to succeed as a solicitor. So, take what you will from that, misogynistic old dinosaur. But at that point, I just thought I didn't necessarily want to be, as we're going back a long way at the time, I think, being in a law firm meant that it was very much providing a service as opposed to sort of getting involved in the business. So I just wanted to get more involved in the business side.
And had you always had a passion for film as well? Because since then, you pretty much focused on the film industry.
I had always, since I was a small kid, it was the thing that I did with my dad. We loved film. We sort of, had regular trips to the cinema, but also it was kind of linked to his business. So I watched films endlessly at home. Also when I was at university, it was pretty much all I did with my spare time. Didn't even put 2 and 2 together. Hadn't quite twigged that I could make a career out of it. And to be honest, ending up with a media firm was more by accident than design. It hadn't been a conscious choice. I just ended up with a law firm that happened to have a media department. But no, it was a very happy accident because, as you say, since then I moved in-house in 94 to BBC Worldwide, and since then I've literally only worked in the film industry. I've been at Polygram Film. That was then taken over by Universal Studios, so I worked there. I've worked at a small indie, I've worked at the UK Film Council, I spent a long time at Channel 4, and now back at BBC. I have been at BBC Films a couple of times, so back there again at the moment.
And of all the films and projects you've worked on, which ones stand out for you?
I think probably 12 Years a Slave, because it was so exciting being involved in something that, when you're there from the very beginning and you sort of work through the whole process, and then to see it sort of winning multiple awards, it's that's incredibly gratifying. So yeah, that was the most exciting probably.
So you've been at the BBC twice. Can you, when you went back, had it changed much, or was it still very much on TV that it had always been?
I've actually been at the BBC 3 times. I started at BBC Worldwide, as it was then, which was the commercial arm. When they were trying, at that point, they were sort of converting TV programmes, and any successful feature-length drama, they were then converting for theatric release after the event, which was a nightmare job, because it meant sort of going in and obtaining clearances from the talent after the fact, that sort of thing. And the colleague I worked with then kept saying, oh, one of these days they might launch their own film division, and it just didn't seem to be happening quickly enough. So, when I got an offer to join Polygram, I moved there. BBC Films was subsequently launched. I moved there in 2003, and I worked there for 5 years, which was fantastic. But then got another good opportunity, so I moved on again. Now that I'm back, I think the BBC is in a very interesting space at the moment. I mean, I think especially after coronavirus, it's proved to be ever more important to the nation. The public sector nature is absolutely crucial. But it's no secret that we are under threat. The fact that the streamers are booming. I think most audiences, younger audiences in particular, now expect to consume all of their content online, on demand. So, we are modernising quickly, but we're still within the next year or so, I think we turn 100 years, so it's a very old organization, and that inevitably brings sort of certain issues.
What role do you think the BBC film part will play in that modernisation?
Well, I joined a few years ago as part of a new team, and we were brought in to shake things up a little, because I think BBC Film's output had always been great, but it was kind of safe. It played to a particular type of audience, and I think the BBC had become aware that it needed to start attracting a younger demographic. So I joined as part of a team that had a bit of a track record in terms of attracting younger talent, more diverse talent. So that's what we're doing at the moment. It's very much about sort of working with new writers, new directors, and we're sort of, I don't want to say R&D, but we're very much, working with new voices, building for the future.
I love your title of Head of Legal and Business Affairs. Are you more a lawyer, or are you more a business person?
I think the emphasis is much more on business than legal. My role, it involves all sorts of things. It's strategic decision making. It's the negotiation of deals, but I do have a very small team, so I do still review and draft contracts. It's not that I don't deal with legal issues at all. At this stage in my career, though, it's much more about identifying legal issues and then knowing how to outsource or delegate or collaborate, which is easy in an organisation the size of the BBC. I've got many colleagues who are much more experienced in particular areas of law, such as fair dealing. So I think with me, it's more about having the experience to sort of recognise a problem and to know what sort of specialised advice I need to get.
So when you say outsource, do you outsource within the BBC, or do you outsource to firms?
It's pretty much always within the BBC. It is public sector, so we don't really have the resource to outsource to firms, unfortunately. We do occasionally, but it's quite unusual for that to happen. But
you've got all the different types of specialisms you need within the BBC. Is that right?
But pretty much, and if not, the UK independent film industry is a very small industry in which most of the practitioners know each other pretty well. So I often tap up my peers for free advice. It's not so much outsourcing; it's just phoning other lawyers to say, what would you do? Or I think we all operate on that basis. It's a very, very small field. So yeah, it's not so much outsourcing as getting free tips.
Brilliant. I like that. So you've got a family, you've got 2 kids. How have you managed to balance your legal career? Because I can imagine the film world has its late nights, just like any other legal role. How have you managed to balance those demands on your legal career, yet bring up a family?
It's an elusive balance, and an ongoing work in progress. Being a working parent is hard, although possibly easier now than it was when I first had my kids. But I think, whether you're a working mum, dad, whatever, it's all about endless compromise. I mean, my first was born in 2000, at which point I had the very first job share scheme within Universal Studios, which at the time employed thousands of people. That literally, I was the first to ever ask for job share.
Incredible.
I know, and incredible how much has changed in the meantime. Yeah. The fact that in the last 20 years, it's now the norm is fantastic. It's a huge improvement. But it did mean that for the first the first few years of my children's lives, I sort of ended up with a selection of job share or part-time roles when they were very young, which was good in some ways. It meant that I got to drop them at school every day and I was home for bedtime, but I felt that I was missing out at work because it wasn't necessarily that interesting, and I didn't feel that I was growing enough. So when my eldest started senior school, I geared up again, taking on a much bigger job. At which point the career became much more fulfilling, but then I missed out on certain things domestically. I mean, the kids were absolutely fine, but I missed out occasionally, not making concerts, parents even. But it's as I say, endless compromise, and the same is true for any working parent. So it's ultimately it's about setting boundaries. I think even now that they're grown, if I'm coming home, it's all about engaging fully in whichever sphere you're in. So for example, no phones at the table, that sort of thing. If I'm with the kids, I'm with the kids. If I'm working, I'm working. So it's just about sort of using your time carefully. Yeah.
So was that bravery or necessity that led you to develop that part-time career?
Bravery, I think, in that when you have children, you become fierce, and suddenly your priorities shift. And I knew that I wanted to spend time with my kids, but nor did I want to compromise, the career and the reputation that I've built up until that point. So I just happened to be one of the pioneers in that. I think for the generation of women before me, it had been much harder for them, and they'd had to juggle it all on a man's terms, whereas I think things were changing at the time that I had kids, so I was able to go in and make certain demands which surprisingly were met. I don't think I'd have had the courage to sort of make the requests that I did prior to having kids, but as I say, once you have kids, you'd be a priority shift. So I happened to ride the wave. I was in the right place at the right time. So I was also working at a company that was in the middle of a huge takeover, and I was the last surviving lawyer. Everybody else had left, so they were desperate to hang on to me on any terms. So I was just very lucky. I played it well.
And would you say, looking back, that you got the balance right then between your family life and the working life?
Yeah, I think so. I think my career was in the slow lane for a while, but I do feel particularly connected to my kids. So, and I think since they've been older, and I've been much busier with many more late nights at work. I think that's been good for them. I think they've genuinely benefited from having a mother with outside interests who's a role model for girls in particular. I love the fact my daughter sees what I do and thinks, yeah, that's what I can do. It's not an issue.
Obviously, the UK film industry has been hit hard by the coronavirus pandemic. What do you think the medium and long-term future for it's going to be?
It's rather worrying. It's been hit very dramatically. I mean, all production work has ceased and thousands have been furloughed or made redundant. I mean, it's an industry that's comprised primarily of freelancers. So we've had to work incredibly quickly to try and deal with recovery. We've been busy introducing new sort of health and safety protocols. We're still facing issues such as insurance. We're lobbying for enhanced tax credit while the industry gets back on its feet. It's too for how things will pan out long term. I think we've got challenging times ahead. I think the UK film industry is sort of distinct from there's independent film and there are studio films. I think the studio films are in a healthier position because, you know, they're a bigger budget, they're funded by studios. So, you know, even though they're shooting in the UK, they're often funded by studios. So they're likely to be able to soak up the costs that have arisen as a result of health and safety protocols in a way that UK independent film might struggle a little. You know, we're facing huge additional costs as a result of coronavirus. So it's challenging.
And is that hitting your workload as well?
Yes, yeah, very much so. I've been sort of very heavily involved in various industry task forces and working groups, sort of looking at how to address things. And then, you know, the day job, the bread and butter stuff is very busy as well. I think there's currently a lot of emphasis on development, which is, you know, script writing, that sort of thing, the stuff that can be done at a safe social distance. So yeah, it's been incredibly busy 3 months. You know, it's been a very steep learning curve as well. The fact that I've had to get up to speed with stuff like, you know, furloughing and the sort of stuff that normally I wouldn't have had to deal with.
Has coaching played any part in your career, Geraldine?
Yes, very much so. Not so much at the moment. Not for want of opportunity within the BBC. They you know, there's a strong coaching culture there, but I'm very lucky in that at the moment I've got a great gig. It's constantly evolving. It's never boring. I've got very supportive colleagues. So at the moment, I'm not actually looking for answers. But in the past, I've used career coaches, often provided by my employer. You know, for example, when I was at Channel 4, I faced a few challenging management situations, but Channel 4 was fantastic in terms of offering independent career coaches who really challenged my perspectives and methods and made me approach things in a different way. I also approached a senior colleague at Channel 4 whom I admired greatly, to ask if she'd be happy to mentor me. She worked in a very different part of the business, but I'd sort of learned a bit about mentoring and just approached this woman because I thought she was rather fabulous. I think it helps, you know, whether it's a mentor or a coach, having an objective bystander's viewpoint is incredibly helpful. Especially, you know, the sort of higher up the ladder you climb. It's, you know, it's one thing when you're sort of hanging out with lots of junior lawyers and you can compare notes, but, you know, it's kind of isolated, you know, the sort of the further up the ladder you climb. So it's you know, essential to get third party opinions on occasion.
Geraldine, it's been absolutely fascinating talking to you. Thank you very much for sharing your perspectives on the BBC today and your career. It's been brilliant. Thank you ever so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Nice talking to you.
So that was Geraldine Atlee, Head of Legal and Business Affairs at BBC Films, talking to Oliver. And Oliver is with me now. Oliver, really fascinating to hear Geraldine's journey. And one of the things that really struck me from her interview with you was that, you know, the idea of that no individual can do it all on their own.
I think that was really well observed, Claire. It's almost as if the collaborative process that she's experienced to create and produce films, she brings to the way she operates as a lawyer, be that getting the deal done or seeking out help within her organisation on particular points, or even, and I love that notion of just going outside into the broader film community to try and get solutions to any challenges she might come up against.
And I think, you know, I'm sure you've had similar conversations with your coaches. That notion of, you know, not doing it all on your own is one I think that lots of people, you know, often fall foul of, that they, you know, they feel like, you know, particularly when they've reached a certain point in their career, that, you know, it's perhaps a sign of weakness to reach out and ask people for help, or perhaps to, you know, to have a network and to tap into that. But, you know, I thought it was a really important message just to say, actually, no, you know, sometimes I don't know everything, and sometimes I do need to go out and ask other people, and that's okay, and that makes me stronger and it makes me human.
I think that's true, and it was also good to see that thought process applied when she used coaching, how she was facing some specific problems in the workplace and used that external sounding board to try and explore new ways to solve the things that she was confronted by.
And really fascinating also to hear her journey. I'm, a mum of four, so my reflection on, just how much things have changed over the years, and be interesting to see what happens in another 20 years when, my children, well, in fact, hopefully they're not having children in 20 years, but, when my children have children, what that will look like.
And it was that comment which motherhood made me fierce. And it's such a shame that she had to become fierce in order to succeed and have a career and be a mother at the same time.
And that left me reflecting as to whether I've become more fierce since I was, first became a mum. And I think, one of the things that I have become more protective over, certainly, is how I spend my time. I've always worked full time. I went back to work, with all four of them when the children were very young. So I only had 3 months maternity leave for the first two. And then with my twins, I did shared parental leave with my other half, and also took a very small amount of time off. But I think you do become more aware when you're working that, you could be somewhere else and you could be with your children. So I think it makes you much more disciplined, or certainly it's made me much more disciplined when I am working. And, perhaps that, does sometimes come out a bit as being fierce too, because you want to be efficient and you want to get things done. And I think, true, I suspect of all parents, and, links back to that, original reflection of you can't do it all on your own. And I think oftentimes what you see is, you see the person who's juggling a family, you see the person who's, doing very well at work. What you don't see is that network that sits behind. So, you don't see, my parents who help out with the kids. You don't see the childminder that I have on the odd day. You don't see the people that you tap into in the work environment. So I think it's really important that people remember that, no one can do it on their own. And actually it's, having that really strong network is really important.
I also thought Geraldine had a great coaching tip, which was to be in the room wherever you are, be in the room as a parent and be in the room as a worker, and really focus on what the job in hand is. And I think that's a really great lesson for any worker. Make sure you're getting the best out of whatever it is you're doing at that particular point in time.
Oliver, thank you so much for your time and for the interview, which was really interesting.
No problem. I really, really enjoyed it.
And thank you all for listening. We hope that you'll join us for the next episode of Lawyers Coach.
Lawyers Coach is brought to you by Client Talk and Hansard Coaching. If you're enjoying this series, please rate us on your podcast provider so that others can find us. If you're a lawyer and would like to take part in Lawyers Coach, please visit our website lawyercoach.co.uk for further details. And you can also join the conversation on our LinkedIn group Lawyers Coach. If there are any topics you'd like to hear us discuss, then just get in touch.